Hi, in this video we're going to be looking at part 3 of the IELTS speaking test. This part of the test is often thought of as the hardest part or the most challenging part of the test, and a lot of students who take the test are quite intimidated by this part of the test and they worry about it quite a lot. Now, I don't think it's the part of the test that you should be worrying about too much. The thing is, by this part of the test, the examiner probably has a really good idea of what band score they're going to give you for your speaking. So, part 3 is really just a chance for you to push your score up. The examiner's going to check to see if you can do anything that you haven't already shown them. So really you can think of it as this, a chance to push your score up, rather than a part where your score is going to go down. Now, what we're going to do is focus this video on a skill that the examiner is kind of testing in this part of the test. They want to see if you can do things that you might not have already done in earlier parts of the test. And one of those things are testing your ability to compare. This is something that's not so easy to do in English. It involves complex sentences and using some kinds of grammar that's quite difficult. So it's something they want to test to see if you can do it. It's unlikely that you've already done this in part 1 or part 2. Remember, part 1, you're just describing yourself, talking about yourself, and in part 2, you're describing something, and it will just be one thing, so it's unlikely that you're going to be comparing. So in part 3, this is one thing that they'll test. Now, of course, we know that the examiner is going to be asking you questions out loud and you're going to be listening and then answering those questions straight away. You don't really have any time to prepare your answer, so this part is difficult. And I think a lot of people spend too much time worrying about what topic is going to come up. We really don't know. There's no way of predicting what topic you're going to get when you're in the test. But we do know that you're going to be tested on some certain skills in English, and comparing is one of those skills. So that's what I think you should focus more time on, is really practicing those skills that the examiner is going to test. Not worrying about what topic is going to come up, because there's really no way to predict that. So if I just explain and give a few examples of these types of comparing questions, so you can have a look at them and think about how you might answer these questions. And also I'll give you a sample answer for one of these styles of questions and give it a bit of an analysis so you can see how we're showing that we have this skill to the examiner. And this is the type of kind of thing that you've got to focus on to show that you're actually able to do these things, because that's what the examiner really cares about. They're there to assess your English. They don't really care how much you know about a topic. Really, in part 3, they're asking for your opinion on things. That means there's no right or wrong answer. There's just a good, clear answer and a bad, unclear answer, where maybe you don't show off these skills that the examiner is checking that you have or don't have. So when I say they're going to be testing your ability to compare, this is going to be maybe 1 or 2 questions within part 3 where they ask you a question that requires this type of speaking. For instance, if they have a question on living in cities, they might ask you a question like, how is living in the countryside different to living in a city? You can see here the question's asking you to compare these 2 ways of living. And again, like I said, it doesn't require you to have lots and lots of knowledge about living in the countryside or living in the city. Again, it's opinion, but they're checking that you can compare these 2 styles of living. And they'll be listening for your use of things like comparative adjectives or sentences that you will structure to compare things. Maybe things like comparative conjunctions as well, to compare things like but or while or however. Things like this. This is what they want to hear. They don't mind if you don't have lots and lots of knowledge on a topic. In fact, you don't need much knowledge. And again, these kinds of questions are not really knowledge-based questions anyway. They're opinion questions. That's what they're focused on. So that's one example of a question that's getting you to compare. Another one might be one like this. Do you think that reading novels is more interesting than reading factual books? So again, you see here the topic is completely different, right? It's not about living in cities, it's about reading. This would be a topic that could come up in part 3. Again, we don't know what topic you're going to get when you're in the test, but we can see that these are common styles of questions, the questions that get you to compare. Now, this is asking you to compare reading novels and reading factual books, the difference between fiction books and non-fiction books, and you've got to compare the experience of reading those two different books and which is more interesting for you. Again, this is about your opinion. There's no right or wrong answer. Your idea doesn't have to fit with the opinion of what the examiner thinks. I find a lot of students worry about this. They think, well, should I give this answer or should I give that answer? Well, it doesn't matter. You give your honest opinion. What the examiner is testing is that you can explain your opinion well and show that skill of comparing these two things. So that's 2 examples of a question that gets you to compare. There is another type of comparing question that's slightly different to these 2 types we've looked at already. And that is the kind of comparing question where they get you to compare the present with the past. And again, this is very common because, well, number 1, they're testing your ability to compare, but secondly, they're testing your ability to use different tenses within one answer, to understand that you have to talk about the present and talk about the past if you're comparing the two, and even maybe use some perfect tenses, like the present perfect to describe the past compared with the present. But this is a common type of question that you're very, very likely to get when you're in the IELTS speaking test in part 3. Now, we have no idea what topic you're going to get. That we really can't tell. There are hundreds of topics that could come up, but we do know that you're probably going to have to do this. Number 1, compare, and maybe compare the present with the past. If you're still struggling to understand what I mean by this, comparing the present with the past, here's a question that gets you to do that. Do you agree that customers are more likely to complain nowadays? So you can see here, well, it is an agree-disagree question, which is something that people often talk about. But really the focus of the question is getting you to compare, right? The present with the past. Are people more likely to complain now? Okay, it doesn't make it super clear that you have to compare with the past, but it's just suggested from the question because we've got a comparative in the question. Are people more likely to do something than they did in the past, right? We've got that word there nowadays to show, okay, you've got to talk about now, but of course you've got to compare with something because there's a comparative in that question. So here, of course, you're comparing with the past. Have things changed since the past until now? So when you answer, yes, you've got to use comparatives in your answer to show that skill. That's what the examiner is really concerned about here. They're not really worried about whether your answer is factually correct. They really don't care. Their job is to assess your English speaking ability, your level of speaking English. Can you do these things that the question is asking you to do? So I'll tell you what we'll do now. let's have a look at a sample answer to this question. And what I want you to do when you listen to the answer, I want you to think about how we're showing the examiner that we can compare. So let me repeat the question again and then show you the answer. Do you agree that customers are more likely to complain nowadays? Yes, I'd say people complain more than they might have done in the past. Now, if someone buys a product or service, it's much easier for them to give their opinion on it because of the internet. In the past, it was more difficult to make a complaint, as you might have had to write a letter or complain to someone face to face. My grandparents, for instance, probably used to complain a lot less than people my age do. So there we have it. You can see here, and again, this is one thing I want you to see, is that the type of answers we're giving in part 3 aren't especially long. They're just clear and concise answers that fully answer the question that you're given and show the skills that the examiner wants to hear. That's all this answer is doing. Now, if we go through sentence by sentence here and really look at how we've shown the skill of comparing. Now, again, we've got another topic for this type of comparing question. The topic is, well, complaining or customer service, this kind of area of a topic. But you can see in the answer, okay, there's some other good things to point out here in the first sentence, but really the main thing I want to look at is the way we're comparing. Yes, I'd say people complain more than they might have done in the past. So you can see there straight away, we're showing that we understand the question is asking us to compare. We've got the verb complain, which has just been directly taken from the question, and then more than. Right? We can have these two words together when they're following a verb. People like to complain more than they might have done in the past. Now, again, you can see some quite complex things there with the tense. Okay, we're actually using the present perfect there to show that we understand it's from the past until the present. But really the key thing there is that we're comparing. Now, if we go on to the second sentence, you can see here, well, again, we've got some other things that make this second sentence good, but the real thing I want you to focus on here is the fact that we're still comparing. You can see, first of all, okay, we start with now to show we're talking about the present. If someone buys a product or service, here it is. It's much easier for them to give their opinion. So we've got that comparative adjective there, easier. I make it even stronger by putting the word much before it. It's much easier for them to give their opinion on it. Okay, I'm doing other things in this sentence as well that are quite complex to do, but really here, this is the focus. This is what I want you to see, that we're comparing. In fact, every sentence shows this skill off. In the next sentence, we go into more detail because really here we're in that sentence there, we've explained the present. Now, but again, we want to show how it's changed. So we've got to kind of compare that with the past. So in this next sentence, we start with the phrase in the past. And here we go. It was more difficult to make a complaint. Well, here's the key. More difficult. Again, we're showing another comparative. We're showing the understanding that, okay, easier, in the last sentence, we can just change the Y to an I and have an ER on the end, easier, and we don't have to use the word more. But then we can show with difficult, we understand that we can't just add an ER on the end of difficult, we've got to stick more before it. So it was more difficult to make a complaint. Again, there is the complex thing there with the tense and changing tenses within one answer. But here is really the key, that the examiner is listening for your use of comparatives to show this skill. So then in the final sentence as well, we still go on to compare more. We're giving a bit of an example here as well. You'll notice with this kind of structure for a part 3 question, it's taking this kind of nice step-by-step structure where we're giving a direct answer, we're explaining a bit, and then we're ending with a bit of an example. It's a nice natural structure to use for these types of questions in part 3. But really, that's for another video. Let's look at this sentence and see the way that we've compared. So my grandparents, for instance, probably used to complain a lot less than people my age do. So here, the comparative here is to complain a lot less than. We're comparing, right? Again, here we're comparing with a verb. And we want to show that we understand. We've shown that we can use more already. So here we're showing that we understand how to use less and make it stronger by using a lot, right? A lot less than. Okay, and we've got that verb before, to complain. So again, what you can see here, hopefully, is that we're showing off that we have this ability to compare. And this is what the examiner really wants to hear when they're asking this type of question. And it's something that's not easy. So it's worth practicing. Finding as many comparing questions as you can, even creating your own questions, taking these questions and maybe changing the topic of the question to something else, and seeing if you are able to compare those things. Like taking the first question that I showed you, how is living in the countryside different to living in a city? Well, by practicing this one, you don't have to worry too much about tenses and changing tenses, and you might want to start practicing one of these types of questions where, yes, we're focused on the present, but again, changing the topic. So instead of having living in the countryside compared with living in a city, you could change it to how is studying in high school different to studying at university? And you could compare those two ways of studying and see if you can do it. And the more you do it, the better you're going to get at using that skill of comparing. It's a skill that a lot of students need work on. And this is the thing. I think a lot of people will panic, really, and worry too much about what topic you're going to get in part 3. We don't know. There's no way that you can prepare for every possible topic that's going to come up. Yes, we should be trying to improve our English, and hopefully the more English you're learning, the more ready you'll be to kind of answer questions on topics. But the whole idea of this speaking test is that they surprise you a little bit, that you get asked about something that you might not expect, because they want to test your real English skills. They don't want to test your memorization skills, really. This is the thing. They're testing your skills. And well, that's what makes the test a bit challenging. You've got to really have good English speaking skills to get a high score. And improving those skills is not an easy task. It's not just a case of memorizing scripts or memorizing set answers to these types of questions. You've got to get good at this skill, the skill of comparing. Now, it's not the only skill that the examiner is testing in part 3. There are other skills that we can do future videos on, but it's certainly one that's worth practicing a lot. It's not only going to help you with your speaking, but also there's parts of the writing where you're asked to compare things. So it's one of those things that is worth spending some time on. Hopefully this was useful to you, and you can go away and practice this skill and improve before you go to the test. So you can show off that skill and hopefully get a higher score in the test. If you have found this video useful, then don't forget, give the video a like. It really does help. And if you haven't already, then click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future videos on similar topics. So there we have it. If any of you have been watching this video and you've been thinking, well, where is the part 2 sample answer that we were planning in last week's video? don't worry, it will be coming. I'll get that up next week. Honestly, I haven't quite finished the full sample answer that I want to show you, but I will get that up, and that will be next week. We'll be looking at that. But I thought it was nice to kind of look at part 3 because it's a part I don't often talk about, but I think it's definitely worth kind of preparing for and practicing certain skills that you're going to need to show off in this part. But there we go. All right, I'll see you again in the next video.